All familiar with is like the JonBenet Ramsey case, where police believed it was the family. Now, 26 years later, the family's still trying to clear their names. God rest her soul, Patsy never had the chance. She passed away. The rest of the Ramsey family's trying to not only solve an unsolved murder of their 6-year-old, but they're also trying to clear their name, and much of the public that bought into the false scenarios that law enforcement was portraying to the public, because they believed it was a family member, and it was ill-gotten for their belief. I mean, the lack of training for starters.
Testimony continued today in the most notorious criminal trial in Richland County history. Dr. John Boyle is accused of killing his wife Noreen and burying her body in the basement of his new home in Erie, Pennsylvania.
The 12-year-old son finally took the stand.
As I heard a scream, I heard a thud. It was about this loud.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty.
When I was 12 years old, my testimony sent my father to prison for murdering my mother. This podcast serves as a type of therapy and reconciliation for myself, and it is my hope that it helps anyone who has experienced deception, betrayal, and dark trauma. I'm Kaitlin Armstrong, and this is Moving Past Trauma. Hey movers, welcome back to another episode of Moving Past Trauma and What's Going On? I want to say welcome to all of you. Welcome to my channel members who are joining. You guys know who you are. And I just want to say thank you all for being here. I'm very, very excited. I had to go downstairs and turn the music off because I've programmed my Alexa. I don't know if you guys know that you can do this on an Alexa, but whenever my dog Marisol barks, it'll say, it's really funny. It says, "It's okay, Marisol. Daddy loves you. Good girl, Marisol. Daddy will be back really soon. Daddy loves you." And then it plays this music. But I discovered, because I'm sitting here and I'm like, what are those birds chirping? It plays this like soothing, calming thing for dogs. So it's this like very light, sort of airy meditation music. And then there's birds chirping, and it's like a sound of nature with like a little stream running. It's pretty funny. So I'm sitting here going, oh my God, where are the birds? I have the windows closed. Like, where are the birds coming from? And now I know they're coming from, because she barked and she activated the Alexa to calm her down, which I think is really funny. So I did post a little video today because, as a lot of you may or may not know, I don't always talk about a lot of true crime stuff, but now I'm getting into more of it, and people constantly ask me about this Lori Vallow, and I became aware of the Lori Vallow situation, probably like many of you did, because of I watched a documentary called Sins of Our Mother. And I talked about it, like, I don't know, a long time ago. I found it very disturbing, to say the least. But I was watching something earlier because I want to talk more about this, because Jason, who is joining us, has worked with people who have been involved in the FLDS faith. And Tara Newell's on here, and we actually have interviewed the 65th wife of Warren Jeffs. So we've heard a little bit about the FLDS faith, and nothing wrong with anyone that is a person of faith at all. So I was watching this, because I think people have discovered that she was on like Wheel of Fortune, and she won like $17,000 or something, which she apparently talks about with the police officers when her husband is mysteriously killed, and by her brother. And so I was listening to a little bit about that because the guy who this British gentleman had written a book about her, and so I was very fascinated by that because they were talking about her courtroom appearance and how she was, how she looks. And they were discussing how she uses Jolly Ranchers for lipstick. And I wanted to jump through the screen and correct them, because it's not Jolly Ranchers. It is red or cherry or strawberry Kool-Aid that they use. And I know this because when I would visit my father in prison, I would be in the visitation room, and you would see people who were, they were prostitutes. What am I going to say? That's what they were doing. And they were in prison. They were somebody's prostitute, somebody's woman or whatever. And I asked my father, I was like, how are they wearing lipstick? And he explained to me, probably because he had one, I'm sure, like, or something weird like that they use red Kool-Aid, cherry Kool-Aid, and that's how they dye their lips. So it's not Jolly Ranchers, for those of you that know, because the Jolly Rancher would wear off. But the dye from the red Kool-Aid that they can get in the commissary is how they paint their lips. Just a little fun fact while we're waiting for Jason, who has arrived. As I said, I'm still learning the live stream thing. Oh, before Jason comes on, I do want to say, starting next week, I'm going to be doing 2 episodes back to back. We're going to start on Wednesdays. And the time is going to be at 4 p.m., I believe. Now, moving forward, it's just easier to type out the text than 4:30 or 7:30. So it'll be 7 p.m. Eastern time instead of 7:30. It's going to be on Wednesdays and Thursdays. We're going to do a Wellness Wednesday, and we're going to do a true crime, moving past trauma Thursday. And there's going to be, I'm going to have a couple of really interesting guests. Actually, Tara Newell is going to join me on a couple of these as well. There's a medium who she deals with child cases and finding missing children, and she is a psychic medium. And we recently met her, and she's written a book called Little Voices. Her name is Kirsten. She's going to be joining with one of the detectives that she works with that has solved cases because of her medium work. It's actually really fascinating. It's something that I don't necessarily, I know, and I know a lot of you have actually asked me if I've been to a medium to contact my mother, and I haven't actually yet, but I found it really fascinating, my conversation with her. I said, I'd really love to bring you on. I think my audience would really engage with this. So hopefully that'll be something. And then the next day I'm having an attorney who specializes in getting people out of prison who have been wrongfully convicted, wrongful conviction cases. And he and I had a fantastic conversation yesterday. He's worked a lot he works with the California Innocence Project, and it's getting people who have been incarcerated wrongfully and actually helping those people and helping those families solve those cases because somebody was wrongfully convicted. So getting justice for the families. So we're going to discuss all that as well. That'll be on Thursday. And the following week, I'm going to have Roberta Blevins on, if you guys saw the documentary Lula Rich, from the LuLaRoe cult. So she's going to be joining the program as well. So a lot of fun guests are coming up. But today's guest is Jason K. Jensen. He is the head of the Utah Cold Case Coalition. And he is a private detective who's been working in the field for almost 20 years, I believe, or well over 20 years. And he's going to share some stories with us. He's going to share how he copes and helps families cope with the trauma of losing loved ones, especially children. And we're going to discuss all these things. We might even talk a little bit about the FLDS sort of cases as well. But I'm pleased to welcome to the program Jason K. Jensen.
Evening, Collier. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. It's a pleasure. Just a quick clarification. I'm not the head of the Cold Case Coalition. I'm one of the 3 co-founders. So I don't accidentally slide my colleagues. I'll make sure that's clear before we proceed.
You are a co-founder. Sorry, guys. Yes, but you are involved in creating that, and you have obviously 2 partners. And thank you all for the work that you're doing in cold case work. And so why don't you start by telling us exactly who you are, what you do, and your story?
Sure. I'm a private investigator for 15 years. After I had 10 years under my belt, I felt like I was advanced enough in my skills. I wanted to give back to my community because, a lot of true crime people out there want to help, but me, with my experience, I wanted to be able to help professionally. So I launched, within my 10 years, I launched a program called Jensen Cold Cases. And then shortly after that, in 2018, me and my 2 co-founders, Kara Porter, an attorney of 32 years, and Tom Harvey, a retired journalist from the Salt Lake Tribune, we all formed up a coalition originally to aid in the assistance in the investigation of the unsolved murder of Rosia Tapia. So it was kind of like the Rosia Tapia coalition. And with the blessing of the family, we expanded to cover all the cold cases in Utah. So we were originally the Utah Cold Case Coalition. And then last year, at our 5th anniversary, we decided to go national. So we dropped the word Utah. Now we're just a Cold Case Coalition. And we provide everything from financial resources to law enforcement to help them, pay for DNA testing, to coordinate to get cadaver dogs helping in a case, or even putting our nose in the books ourselves to see if we can't spark leads in a case, to sharing case information via, the internet or social media to garner attention on cases, as well as a couple of years ago with the vision of Carol Porter and her financial assistance, as well as Betty Porter. They contributed over $1 million, and we launched a nonprofit DNA lab called Intermountain Forensics. And so we're competing with the likes of Bodie and Parabon to provide DNA analysis as well as genetic genealogy using state-of-the-art equipment like the Varigen, doing SNPs, expanding the horizon of DNA technology to sites that haven't even been seen by government yet.
That's really wow. That's a lot. That's that is amazing. Amazing. So in your work, and so I mean, how did you get started in all this? Like, what was the first? I had seen a little snippet of you on 2020. They were talking about the Gabby Petito case, and you were speaking a little bit. But what was that one case that sort of dragged you into the work?
Yeah, you're talking the moment, and strangely enough, it happened to be the Rosia Tapia case. I mean, it's an unsolved homicide of a 6-year-old who was abducted from her bedroom. I mean, as a parent, that has got to be the worst nightmare. You think that your family is safe and sound, tucked in their beds in the middle of the night, and then lo and behold, somebody violates the sanctity of that castle of yours, sneaks into the house, takes one of your kids from under your nose, and then does the most evil things to your child. Sexual assault and killing them are the two worst things you can do to a child. And then you spend the next 26 years trying to figure out what happened. It's got to be just the worst possible scenario any one of us as parents have ever conceived happening to our family.
Yeah.
So in 2016, I offered to help pro bono to the Tapia family. And, here we are several years into this. We feel like we have a good handle on what happened, who did it, how they committed the crime. But it's really the biggest struggle you have in any unsolved homicide when you're looking at it yourselves, or if you're looking at it from a private investigator standpoint, is what will get the police attention, what will it take to get the police to agree with you, to catch up with you, and not every time the law enforcement is willing to see things through your lens and agree with you on your perspective on things. One of the key examples that we're all familiar with is like the JonBenet Ramsey case, where the police believed it was the family, and for now 26 years later, the family's still trying to clear their names. God rest her soul, Patsy never had the chance. She passed away many years ago. But the rest of the Ramsey family is trying to not only solve an unsolved murder of their 6-year-old, but they're also trying to clear their name and divert law enforcement attention away from them and much of the public that bought into the false scenarios that law enforcement was portraying to the public, because they believed it was a family member, and it was ill-gotten for their belief. I mean, a lack of training for starters, but the statistic even doesn't even match that. Less than 23% of the time, the murder of a child is a family member. So what would make the police believe it was a family member has to be quite sizable. Compare that to now the Lori Vallow Daybell case and the Chad Daybell case, it seems pretty obvious to us all, that they're going through the rigors of proving their case along the constitutional standards in court, but we're all pretty clear based on behavior, based on the circumstantial evidence, based on where the bodies were found, who's responsible for the death of J.J. Vallow and Kaitlin Armstrong. It's pretty obvious to us all, but it was never that obvious to, the regular street folks who was responsible for JonBenét's death. So why would law enforcement be so gung-ho to focus on the family as they did? And the only thing that they had to fall back on as any claim was they thought that the handwriting of the ransom note looked like Patsy, which isn't really the case. I mean, there's many facets of the handwriting that looks similar to many of us, because remember, handwriting was a grammar school taught skill. We're all taught certain ways how the letter are constructed. Like the letter A, it's two intersecting lines at an angle with one line in the middle below the halfway point. It was standardized. So what brings your attention to handwriting is not so much what's similar to the ransom note, but what's dissimilar to the public that stands out between your handwriting and the ransom note. And I've worked on the JonBenet Ramsey case, and I know many aspects of the handwriting of the ransom note are pretty unique that isn't traditional to how we're taught in school. And one of the things that I can really refer you to that stands out the most is how this individual wrote the lowercase b, the lowercase d, and the lowercase p. They're not the traditional writings that you see where you come down and then you do do the bubble next to it. No, typically it looks more like the musical note where they come down and it continues to go, and then so it's just one motion with the curve that connects, or it goes the other way and comes up and connects. That is unique to that person that writes that style. So if you find another person that writes their letters in the same way, you're looking at a suspect more than you're looking at somebody that's eliminated. And it's more like their musical notes. So you might wonder if this individual played music or wrote music, like played a guitar or whatnot.
Why do you think that? So in this JonBenet Ramsey case, because that is just such a massive a massive case, right? I mean, I think that happened. When exactly did all that go down? I'm trying to think where I was was I in high school? Was it 95, 98?
It was December of 96.
96. Okay, so I was right out of high school. Okay. When you're talking about things that law enforcement passes over or something like that, I just remember that case being so gripping, and I think maybe there was this sort of the tabloid conjecture around it with the pageant kid sort of thing and all of that. But how do things like that spiral so far out of control with law enforcement, and when they become so laser focused on the wrong people, on the wrong suspects? How does that get so convoluted?
Well, I mean, as far as the Ramsey case itself goes, it's the fact of the matter that that small community didn't have a high crime rate. It's not like they had all this experience investigating homicides. It was a quiet community, upper scale, where they didn't have murders. So when your chief investigator, his claim to fame at the time was he solved a bicycle theft ring case, and then all of a sudden he's a homicide investigator, and they're turning down the qualified assistance of bigger agencies like somebody dedicated from Denver or somebody from Colorado Springs that might have more experience to bring to the table, or the FBI or any other agency where there's real experience and they say, no, 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 we got this. It seems to be kind of arrogant and negligent, because if you get this wrong, you're no one's hero. But if you do it right, because you got the right people and the right resources and the right expenses and the right talent, then everybody's a hero. And I think, when this happens, it's due to tunnel vision, number one, and just sheer arrogance of, I know what happened and I'm not going to listen to anybody else. You're not going to let the facts lead you to the suspect, but you identify a suspect and then hope to build a case to that suspect. And I think that's where they went wrong here. Is Detective Trujillo was so focused on, we don't know who did it, but it was one of the family members, and we're just going to do a negative public smear campaign until one of them cracks and snitches out the other one. That you better be right, because you're destroying families. And your podcast here is moving past trauma. Can you imagine the trauma on top of trauma if
Yes.
you're not only grieving the loss of your child, but not just a death? Everybody can appreciate, or the experience of, I lost a loved one. They died. It was cancer, a car wreck. It was, they died in their sleep in their old age. Everybody has their story of a loved one that they can relate to, that, oh, I remember when my mom died. I remember when my grandmother died, or something like that. But to see nothing but a bright future, and all this joy that this little bundle of happiness brings you on a day-to-day basis. I'm a parent. I love my child, and this is, every day I just love to wake up and make them breakfast and get them ready for school. And you got all this excitement, especially like in Patsy's case.
Yeah.
She just came up, she just was cleared of cancer, and she knew her life, she was in remission, and she knew that her life was shortened anyway. She tried to live a whole life in a short period of time because she knew that her days were numbered. So she went over the top and was trying to do everything with her family, with her daughter, and the pageants were just her life, because she was a pageant queen. So she, has her daughter into this kind of stuff, and her daughter loved it and relished it and was a little ham and was fun and exciting. And they turned that joy, some that she experienced with her daughter, and turned into exploitation stories. And so not only was she untimely stripped of this unexpected death, and it was a tragedy in her own home, and with no understanding of how it came about or why it had to happen and why us, and all this grief on top of grief. And then on top of it, you got to defend yourself from false accusations, being defamed in the public eye, and having part of the country believe you did it, the other half of the country, defending you. But for the next 20 something years, you're sitting there living with this kind of stigma that maybe or maybe not you're a murderer, as well as, I had to lose my child, and we don't know what happened to her. Let's focus on who really did this. And you're not getting that kind of support from the only law enforcement authority that has jurisdiction over you. That's got to be insult to injury.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The thing that I think sticks it out in my mind is, okay, we're talking December 1996.
Right.
There is no Twitter. There's no
Nope.
TikTok. There's no YouTube. There's really, I don't think I started really getting emails until around that time, figuring it out, right? I mean, there's bulletin board systems and things with Prodigy, but you take that, if that case would have happened, I often look at this with my father's case and my family's case, like how different things would be. That would be now 30 years later. This would be 25 years later or 27 years later. How much different is it nowadays? Because there's a lot of obviously speculation, conjecture around the Idaho 4 killings, around around obviously this Lori Vallow case, around obviously the Murdaugh case, and all of these things, and just everyone speculating about theories. Everyone's an armchair detective, right?
Right.
Or when it comes to the victims, they're a Monday morning quarterback. Oh, they should have known. They should have this, that, and it's just the rumor mill. And how, in your opinion, as an investigator that looks into these things, how does that type of conjecture, that type of frenzy, because I look at that differently than like media conjecture, right? Because at least media conjecture can sort of be held accountable. You could sue the network, that like for the most part, the media will not will not make up, libelous statements for fear that they're going to get taken to court, right?
Right.
But when you have underground communities of amateur sleuths, and Vanity Fair had recently done an article about this around the Idaho 4 case, how do you combat that and probably the outpouring of just misinformation that must flood these families that everybody's heard something, and how do you wade the waters of that and help these families navigate those waters rather?
Right.
Because I know that there are PIs that are predatory that will, and I've been told this by many people, that will go to approach families and say, I can help you find your loved one. And it's a money grab. And of course, a grieving family is going to, okay, how much do you want to find my child? We will put it all on credit cards. We will mortgage our house. I know that happens. How do you combat all of that?
Well, I mean, how I combat it is my approach to a case is, if you come to me, it's fair game for me to offer a fee for my service. But if I go
Sure.
to you, I don't offer to do it for free. I do it pro bono, or I feel that there's some kind of ethical issue that could be at play, like you're describing. It may sound predatorial. It's like if I come up to you and like ambulance chase, and the very first thing I say is, I'll help you find your daughter or your son. Here's my fee. That seems to be, ambulance chasing, as if the incentive is for the money rather than the incentive is to help. And I'd rather come across as being genuine. I'm trying to help. Like I'm not working for the Tapia family for a fee.
Absolutely.
I got into the JonBenet Ramsey case, didn't talk a fee. All this stuff comes out of my own pocket.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I wasn't suggesting that at all. I was merely saying,
I'm just making sure that you understand that's how I handle it.
Of course. Absolutely.
Is if you come to me and say, hey, how much for your services? Well, you're asking how much for my services? Well, here's how much I charge. If I'm coming to you, that's a different ball game. And like in the JonBenet Ramsey case, I never dreamed I'd be working on the case, but it took one question and one answer that got me involved on the case, because I looked at that case as I do many other cases, especially the bigger cases. It's like, so many minds, so many experts have already looked at that case or that case. There's nothing I can do to contribute. It's like, oh, you've had Henry Lee look at the case. Oh, wow, I can't compete that forensically. Oh, you've had John Douglas look at the case. Oh, I can't profile any better. Oh, you've had, this detective or that retired detective look at the case. Well, what makes me think I can help? Well, when it came to the Ramsey case, it came down to one question. I based on my experience as one of the co-founders of the Cold Case Coalition, I approached the Ramsey family and I said, hey, typically what we learned from other cases, DNA later on reveals through genetic genealogy, because remember, they've been making a big deal hoping to get genetic genealogy on board to solve the Ramsey case. So I approached them saying, hey, we know from genetic genealogy, typically we learn that the culprit was a neighbor, which, no surprise, if it's a stranger, if it's not somebody in the home, how would this person know that there was a ideal victim in your home? Usually it's a neighbor or somebody that they associate, somebody maybe at their church or where they used to go to work or whatever. So I asked, I said, did they look at any of the neighbors? And I gave them examples. This case was this person, this case was that person. And John responded saying, they never bothered to do a neighborhood check. Wow, why? And it's because they were so focused so quickly on the family that they didn't bother to exclude the obvious pool of suspects. It's like, well, if it was an intruder, was it a neighbor? Who has access, who had knowledge of that basement window, who would know how to get in the backyard, who would, and there's an alleyway and there's homes that look down upon into the bedroom and the bathroom of JonBenet's bedroom. So why wouldn't it be one of the neighbors that could look down on JonBenet's bathroom? I mean, some of the obvious things I would have looked at. So when they said they didn't bother to check the neighbors, well, it's like, hey, do you mind if I check out the neighbors? And I have databases that I can look at who lived where in 1996 among the neighbors. And, and I found somebody that was suspicious. And I even submitted that as a lead to Boulder PD, just in case, because this guy had criminal history. He was a neighbor. So that being said, that's how I got started in on the JonBenet case. One thing then leads to another where, for instance, the SBTC signature came about, and I had someone that follows my work submit a tip to me saying, hey, did you know that there was a couple of professors there at the University of Colorado, Boulder, just just a half a mile from the home, that wrote a paper about a single base truncated crystals just 8 months before this, and their acronym for that was SBTC. It's like, wow, maybe this was a student of theirs, and that's why it's signed Victory SBTC, because they did a breakthrough with the truncated crystal approach to semiconductors. Maybe that was on the wall in the classroom. So the whole thing is sometimes you have to look at things that happen in the surrounding environment and get your head out of the home. The reason why law enforcement likes the idea that it was not an intruder in any case, that is, look at the family members first, because that is a finite number of a pool of suspects. You were home, all of you are suspects until you're eliminated, right? So you got 2 people home, 3 people home. In the Ramsey case, you got Burke, you got the mom and dad. That's it. Wow, we only got 3 suspects. If it was someone within the home. If it's an intruder, now you open the door to the possibilities of it being anybody, right? Because if they were in that neighborhood, that's a suspect. If it was a neighbor, that's a suspect. So the inclination would be, let's not go there, because that sounds like a lot more work than if we're just trying to figure out which one of these 3 people did it. But think about it. They're claiming that a stun gun was used. They're claiming that this little girl was choked with a garrote. Well, does that sound like the workings of a 9-year-old brother? And blunt force trauma on top of the head. It's like, well, that seems a lot of anger to be expressing on a little 6-year-old sister. So, you kind of just logically can eliminate Burke. Although you hear a lot of stories out there, Burke must have done it. He was mad. He felt like he was, in the shadows of his sister. And you're talking a 9-year-old. You can see her getting pushed down the stairs or something like that. But all of that, a garrote, hit on the head, and you're for what, over pineapple? Come on, put a little bit of sensibility in your analysis. But
Sure, but that's where I get with the conjecture.
Parents, I don't know if you have family, but just assuming for a second that you do, would you harm? Is there any conceivable reason why you would harm your own child to that extreme? Even if it was, oh my gosh, my son did hit my daughter in the head. Oh, let's cover it up. Why wouldn't you call 911? Why wouldn't you try to get the paramedics there and get her to the hospital? It just, none of that really has ever made sense to me, because that not only doesn't sound likely, but it goes against the grain of our constitutional principles. You're innocent until proven guilty, not suspected guilty. No, you're innocent. And to boot, when it comes to a child of your own, you also have the parental presumption of fitness. Fit parents don't abuse their kids to that extreme. They don't murder their children. So they're going against the presumption of innocence as well as the presumption of fitness. So, it never made sense to me. So that's why that was one of the first cases when we expanded nationally, why I would reach out to them and say, maybe there's something I can do to help, because it really never sounded like they were getting a fair shake by law enforcement and much of the community that bought into the lies that they were, that Boulder PD was propagating.
Interesting. But there you go with the conjecture and the presumption.
Nowadays,
exactly. Go ahead.
Nowadays, things are completely different. Bear in mind this: in 1996, it was still, DNA was still in its infancy, right? I mean, as far as forensics goes, it was the three primary sources of DNA that was being used to solve crime. It was blood, saliva, and semen. That was pretty much the crux of it. That was how you solved the case using DNA. And it wasn't a finite little teeny minuscule amount like a picogram or nanogram or anything like that. You had to have enough blood that would cover the pad of your thumb, because it was less sophisticated as it is now. The thing is, touch DNA really hasn't evolved until more in the last 10 years. But the thing that's interesting about touch DNA is there's ways to avoid being detected from touch DNA. And it's the same principles that would defeat you from being discovered for fingerprinting. Okay, so you put on gloves and you don't leave fingerprints at the crime scene. You put on gloves, you are less likely to leave viable DNA at a crime scene too. So when people sit back and say DNA is going to solve the Ramsey case, if you have gloves on, chances are it's not going to solve the case, because if he was smart enough to glove up to avoid leaving fingerprints at the crime scene, which sounds like was pretty likely the case, there was a palm print left on the cellar door, but that may not have been the killer's palm print. We never hear about that, but we hear about the ransom note. We hear about the window. We hear about the suitcase. We hear about the pineapple, but you don't really hear too much about the palm print. Maybe the palm print was left by a detective. Maybe the palm print was a family member's from months before then. We don't know. But if he had gloves on and it was a perpetrator, it was an intruder, which all the evidence seems to point that it was an intruder from what I've seen. You don't have to believe me, but I hope that people do. Lou Smith makes a compelling case when he talks about the window well. There's 3 windows inside the well in the basement. The center window opens up. There was leaves against the 2 windows that don't open. There was no leaves in front of that one, meaning somebody had used the window. So if the window was used that night and so the leaves were kicked away, why is it so hard to imagine somebody entered the home that night? Because they don't want to. They don't want to let go. It's called tunnel vision. They don't want to let go of the fact that they suspect it was a family member. Number one, because they made such a big stinking deal about it. Now they have to eat so much crow to backpedal that one. So they will take this down till the day they die that they know that it was Patsy or John that killed their daughter. You know, to lie about it forever isn't going to change the fact of what's the reality. The fact is, it's entirely likely that it was an intruder, because who would do such a grievous act against a child? Stun them, strangle them, beat them on the head. All the signs in my mind of a failed abduction. And what I mean by that, which would mean that the ransom note wasn't a fake, it was genuine. If this person intended to abduct the child, they struck him on the head to render him unconscious. They've never done it before, so they hit him too hard and actually, caused such a brain injury that if she hadn't died of asphyxiation, it's entirely possible that she would have died from hemorrhaging, in her head. What do they call it? A subdural hematoma.
Mm-hmm.
So that is likely what happened there. We know that there was a flashlight left on the counter that was one of them big heavy-duty police flashlights, a mag light, that the police said it wasn't there. So that likely was the object that was used to hit her in the head with, and it was left at the scene. It's like, okay, now that you're unconscious, I need to pick you up. He left the flashlight behind. Took her downstairs, tried to get her out the house, couldn't get her out the house. In my opinion, it wasn't a garrote wasn't used as a premeditated device. Didn't come to the house expecting to strangle her, because the one end was tied to her wrist, while the other end was tied to a broken paintbrush handle. To me, it looked like it was fashioned in such a way it was intended to use to pull her up out the window. That's my opinion. I don't think it was intended to be used as a strangling device at all. It just happened to be used. It's like, I got to tie around here, I got to tie it around here, and then loosely tied it around her neck, which seems kind of dumb. Why would you tie a rope around someone's neck? It's going to cause, asphyxiation. It's going to close off the airway, or it's going to cut blood to the brain.
You're very knowledgeable. When we were corresponding earlier, we were talking about some of the mental health struggles that the families go through and sort of all their different ways of coping. Obviously, for you, you have to cope with this type of work, but you were sharing with me a few of the stories of varying degrees of how these families have coped. Would you share that with our audience?
Sure. Yeah. And I honestly believe that families never truly get beyond the trauma. They live with it. That's really the problem, that this is a trauma that is so grievous, so destroying, so devastating. There's really two kinds of parents that I see that come out of this. You either got the ardent advocate that goes out of their way to keep this story alive, because they want an answer. They're that thorn in the police side, or they go out and they champion for changes in the law.
Like Elaine Runyan.
Yeah. Or they are a shell of a human being. They're so destroyed, they're so distraught, they turn to a bottle. So, yeah, I'm glad that you brought up Elaine Runyan. When it comes to some parents. And one of the things that, I can say about Elaine Runyan concerning the abduction and murder of her daughter, Rachael Runyan, in 1982, this happened in basically the backyard of her home. It was a school playground on the other side of the fence within 15 feet of their own backyard. It was so compelling for the kids to go play there. They even put a gate so they can just simply go through the gate to the back schoolyard rather than go all the way around the block. So the kids, and we're talking a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1.5-year-old, were playing on the playground while she's sitting there making lunch. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And a stranger came by and abducted little 3-year-old Rachael Runyan. This happened the day after they did their family portraits. So, one of the last thing they did is took a group family picture. Next thing you know, she's having to live, the whole family is having to live with the abduction of their daughter. And it's like, well, it went, weeks without knowing what happened to her.
So hard.
And the case grew in 1982, such a big case. It had national attention. They flew to New York and was on CNN at the time. And it was turned into a national campaign. And from all that, back in 1982, they didn't have, like today we have the Amber Alert system.
Yeah.
Part of that legacy is from Elaine Runyan.
Yeah, you were saying that.
She developed through the state of Utah and the Attorney General's office a system to alert for the alert of an abduction, and they named that the Rachael Alert. And that was one of the predecessors to Amber's abduction out of Texas that later on became the namesake when the Amber Alert system went nationwide. But that legacy really has its roots back to Elaine Runyan. When I was saying that you either become an ardent advocate, well, one of them that comes to my mind is Elaine Runyan, who, can be credited as saving dozens, if not hundreds of lives of little children who potentially become abduction victims because of the Amber Alert system. That goes back to Elaine Runyan. Now, what was interesting about her case, what got me involved, because this was just like JonBenet Ramsey, Rachael Runyan was the Utah version of JonBenet's case. So it was one of those cases where everybody's looked at it and everybody's
got it,
had their nose into it. So it's like, there's nothing I can do to help with this case. But like the JonBenet Ramsey case, it was one question. I went to her, and this happened organically from another case, a 1978 murder. It was the murder of Marla Sharp in Provo, Utah, where in that case, they thought that they found a pubic hair and thought that because of the black color, they assumed that the perpetrator was African American. Okay. Later on, we learned through the Cold Case Coalition, we learned that pubic hair was actually a Hispanic hair. So we know, well, I knew for decades that Rachael Runyan's primary suspect was identified as potentially an African American. So it's been cold since 1982. So because of the misidentification of a pubic hair in the Marla Sharp case, I thought that was a fair question to ask Elaine to help them out. It's like, are you sure they're looking for an African American? Is it possible it could have been a Hispanic or some other ethnicity? And sure enough, just like in the JonBenet Ramsey case, the answer I got from Elaine was favorable, that this needs to be a direction to explore. Because she said, because the source of that was her 5-year-old son, who said that he was a black man. Well, we're talking a 5-year-old eyewitness with a very limited life experience and very limited exposure to other ethnicities in 1982. It's not like he's traveled the world and has in his memory, Indians and Asians and Pakistanis and South Africans and North Africans and Arabs. No. To a 5-year-old Caucasian boy in Utah, I'm sure in his mind there was white people and black people.
Sure.
So when he comes to his mom and says, the black man took my sister, and the police then latched onto that rather than,
understanding they're talking to a child that equates,
it's just
that might not know what they're doing.
Yeah, rather than saying a non-white, they're saying, oh, it's a black man. And so out of that came, you can Google it now and like Rachael Runyan suspect, and they always show one sketch, and it looks like an African American. But in my investigation and digging deep into Rachael Runyan's case, we found, well, Elaine knew this years, it's her case, her life, and it's her story. But what I uncovered was that there was actually a second sketch, one of a Hispanic.
Oh, wow.
This one is the one that everybody's familiar with, that has been in all the coverage. This one was lost in time. This particular display was a 1983 news story, and we're not talking 24-hour news cycles like we get now, or you can catch up on, online with it. No, back in 1982, 83, and stuff like that, if you caught the news at 6 or 10, you got your news quota for the day. If you missed news at 6, you didn't get the news that day. You might have to read about it in the paper the following morning. This particular sketch of what looks like a Hispanic aired in 1983, one time. And nobody, not law enforcement, nobody emphasized that other sketch.
Jason, can I get you to hold that up again? I made you solo I'm still learning this live thing. So I made it so we could see a full screen. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So when we went public with that second description that it was possibly Hispanic, it took 15 minutes and we got a tip that we believe the case is solved. It's just whether or not the police can prove it at this point. And it just took that light bulb coming on where someone goes, oh, possibly Hispanic? Well, guess what? Down the street was this guy, and he was my uncle, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And, he had a whole history of child molesting and rape and this and that and in and out of prison. And he was just out of prison right before this incident. And he went to prison a few years later on another incident. Well, gosh, that sounds like our suspect. He had the same kind of car that was spotted leaving the scene of the crime, yada, yada, yada. Well, again, just like JonBenet, if this crime happened today, it'd have a whole different outcome with cameras around everywhere and DNA and this and that. You can't get away with the crimes that people once got away with because technology and skill sets and everything are a lot different nowadays than they were in 1982.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
Including the 911 and the Amber Alert system.
Yeah.
Back in 1982, they had to dial the long number to the phone, to the police station rather than 911. So, in Elaine's case, she called her husband first. Then they called the police. Then they waited for the police to show up. The guy took her in a car. By the time all that happens, the car's out of the area. So dialing 911, putting the description and plate number and whatever out, and the radio takes over and police are watching for cars speeding by, matching that description. It's a whole different ball game than what existed in 1982.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at the gym this morning, and I was, they've just arrested the suspect in this leaked files, you know, case that was leaked on what is it, Discord with
Right.
the guy.
Yeah, the top secret
Yeah,
military secrets.
and I think okay. So what is today? So today's Thursday. So I think we heard about it on either Monday or like last Friday or something like that. It's been like a
Right.
week, right? And I just am watching, and they're literally saying they're going to make an arrest, and they're saying, oh, he's at Fort Bragg or wherever, and and I'm just thinking to myself, how like everybody is watching. It's just it's like I had done this video with or this episode of my podcast about Chris Watts and my father, comparing them as psychopaths, but also I was intrigued because I'd watched that documentary, and it's all footage. It's all like found footage, if you will, what we call in the
Right.
entertainment industry, but it's all body cam footage and everything. And I'm thinking, this guy, that's 2017. How do you think that people think that they can get away with this in this day and age? With everyone has an iPhone, everyone has a Ring camera on their door nowadays. You can track a person from one end of the block to the other if you really wanted to. And it's just staggering to me how the level of well, I mean, it says the old saying goes, never underestimate the predictability of stupidity. But I wonder how these people think they can get away with it. Why do you think that is? And how do those technologies aid somebody like you?
Right. I would hope that people would catch on that you're not going to get away with it nowadays, and that we could get to a point where crime like murder doesn't ever happen again. But you pointed out people are still stupid and they still think that they can get away with it. Look at Brian Koberger up at the Idaho 4. I'm sure he thought that he was getting away with what he did, and we know that by some of the things, some of the strategies he deployed. He turned off his phone when he left his home, and didn't turn it back on until he was south of Moscow, Idaho. So he's thinking there's no digital trail of himself anywhere. But what he overlooked was there's cameras showing his car going past the murder scene numerous times and speeding down the freeway past the Exxon gas station. And so we know we know that the suspect had a white car, a white Hyundai Elantra. We also know that the left his knife sheath at the crime scene. So I'm sure he didn't expect that to happen. He thought, well, if I use a knife, it's not going to draw attention like a gun blast would, bring in the neighbors and other roommates and whatever, draw attention to it. But he thought a knife is stealthy. But he likely had the sheath in his pocket, and it fell out during the fight, during the struggle, during the assault. His DNA was left on the snap. So the DNA gave him up. So you got the DNA, you got the car, and you got the history of his phone going to and from there that they learned subsequently once they went to the phone carriers and learned, okay, his phone was in the neighborhood at least 6 different occasions. It's like you're not going to get away with anything unless you are driving through town on horse and buggy, where your car's not giving you away. You left your phone at home, or you smashed it, or you didn't even have a phone service. But then now they're claiming that he was found with one of their IDs.
So is that true? So I have to ask you. I don't know any of this. Was this unsealed? Because I know there's a lot of conjecture flying around the Twitter sphere about the IDs, and people are trying to analyze handwriting of the desk clerk that was taking the inventory. Is it an ID? Is it not an ID? What is the thing as a professional? What is because I don't know. I'm just asking.
Right. I would question it unless the source is from an official source, because I would think that he's a complete to actually have the ID in his possession. that's a dead giveaway. If he's trying to get away with the crime, it's bad enough that they claim that he was following them on social media. So you would think that he would completely be divorced from the case, or anybody, contacting them was likely to open the door to be a potential suspect. And, and if he was there following them, doing this, met them at where they would work, or at the same place they'd go have coffee, or the grub truck or something like that, he's asking to be caught, because they always claim that the killer goes back to the crime scene. And we know for a fact in this particular case, Brian Koberger went back to the crime scene the following morning. And people wondered why. I heard people sit back and ponder, did he go back to see if there was police activity? No, I honestly think he went back there hoping to find the knife sheath sitting on the side of the road to collect it. And when he didn't see it at the house, you probably had a oh crap moment, thinking, okay, they're going to find it in the house then. I was hoping it fell out of my pocket, while I was getting to the car. That's what I think. He went back there to hopefully reclaim his knife sheath.
Interesting. So they were able to triangulate. Like, again, I don't know, and I don't know what's conjecture, what's been have these reports or evidentiary findings been released to the public, or is everything under a gag order or seal, or I mean, are we? I hate to speculate about things that we don't know, but I'm just asking you: were they triangulating him, and is that where they like he really literally found him waiting to try to track his stuff down? I mean, I mean, I know that they've tracked him obviously when he drove to Pennsylvania and things of that nature.
Right. Yeah. At that point, they were tracking his whereabouts, and this is why they knew that he was traveling across the country. Or actually, I think I heard that they identified his vehicle from a license plate reader as he was traveling through Colorado. So then they had law enforcement ready to pull him over in Indiana, is my recollection. But that being said, when they were building a case against him, once they had the vehicle description, and in Washington, where he was going to college, the campus police observed a vehicle matching that description, and they started building a case against him. That's when they had authority, got a warrant to go get the phone records, and that's when they went through and identified his phone activity, which placed him at the vicinity of their home, the victim's home, numerous times prior to that date. So that was them building a case that this guy was, as the killer, had a familiarity with his victims. He had been there, either partied with them or was spying on them, stalking them, something to that degree, because they were trying to build a case showing that this suspect also was near the vicinity of these victims prior occasions. They're trying to create a motive. They're trying to create history rather than it be just a random act, because that's a harder case to prove to a jury that was a random act.
Yeah.
But if he was stalking one of them, and we know that because he was at that location numerous times, that's how they're building a case to pitch to a jury.
Fascinating. And also just horrifically tragic as well.
Oh, absolutely. It is mind-boggling why somebody would feel the need to take, innocent lives like this. I mean, we're talking college students. We're not talking 6-year-olds and 3-year-olds, but it's just as tragic because these students had their whole lives ahead of them, and they're just being co-eds, college co-eds, and they
having fun.
They're not harming anybody.
No, living their life, and just I'll never understand it as someone who's tried to comprehend this for the majority of his life, at why people do the things that they do. Earlier on in our conversation, you were mentioning something about if somebody, if the, if you're, why wouldn't somebody call 911? You were talking about JonBenet Ramsey, right? And one of the things that my father, when I confront him in prison in my film, he's saying to me that he accidentally killed my mother, pushed her, she hit her head, he panicked. He tried to give her CPR, and I don't even say it to him because it just felt like, because I was also the whole Department of Corrections was in the room, and I thought they were about ready to kick me out at any second. But I wanted to say to him, "Why didn't you call 911?" It just, there's these things that criminals do, and there's holes in their stories that are so gaping that you could drive a truck through it. You could fly a jumbo jet through it. And they just, because of the psychopathy and the narcissism that's involved in a lot of these perpetrators' situations, they don't see that we see that. They don't think, oh, somebody's going to be smart enough to figure this out. No, they're like, oh, they're idiots. I'm the smartest person in the room.
Right.
Really.
And they believe that if I tell you A, B, and C, you're going to believe A,
it.
B, and C, and you're going to have the ability of independent thought to think of, there's a D in there somewhere. There's other things that could have been done. Like, no, you want me to tell you? I'll tell you the truth, and then tell you a lie. It's like, oh, thanks for telling me the truth.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the criminal mind and how it works. And as I delve more,
and I know I haven't had the chance to tell you, I'm sorry for your loss. You've gone through grief. You had that loss as a small boy, and it's not fair to you, just like it's not fair to these other victims. And this is how you're coping it. You're being a champion. You're being an advocate. You're getting the word out. You're helping others. So again, just like the Kaitlin Runyan example, you're such an example as well. I appreciate that, and I'm sure the community does.
Thank you. This is now the second time in the last week that I'm going to bring a person to tears on camera, but thank you for saying that. It's just what I guess what's called to do. I don't know.
It becomes a calling because you saw what happened to you, and you can't just sit there idly and do nothing.
No.
You feel like you have to help others deal with what you went through. It's coping for you, and it's also educational for others, and it becomes your purpose. Everybody, in my opinion, everybody needs a purpose in life to feel like they're a contribution. This is your contribution to humanity.
Yeah,
you may not recognize that, but that it is. It's your calling.
Yeah,
it's an accidental calling.
It's that's for sure.
I didn't grow up through, elementary school and say I'm going to be a PI. No, at some point in my life it became that calling. I was never a PI by plan. At one point I was going to be a garbage man. I was going to be a pilot. I was going to be a fireman. I was going to be a police officer. I became none of those. And then when I was 40, I became a PI.
Wow.
All by accident. So at some point, our careers are given to us. We can either embrace it and run and make a difference, or we can turn our back to it and still be looking for purpose. I found my purpose when I was 40. You found your purpose, obviously, unfairly at 12. It became your purpose, and you had to wait to grow up to fulfill those shoes, to fill in those shoes. But here you are, here I am, and we're, sharing our experiences with the world.
Yeah, and helping people. It's interesting you said that. I was so obsessed as a child after everything happened about the fact that we looked at crime, and this is before true crime was a thing, right? It was maybe Unsolved Mysteries was on or whatever. I think that came out in the early 90s. I just remember thinking like, the bad guy goes to jail, the state gets his restitution, the victim is dead, the gavel hits, and we say next. And that literally is what became my sort of drive, is to look at the consequences of all of this, because that I always felt was the thing that if we can dive into that, the impact, and that's why I made my film, that impact on that it's not just the taking of, a little girl's life and the devastation that goes on in their family. It's the community, it's the nation, it's the world was gripped by that JonBenet Ramsey case, right? These four students at the University of Idaho, right, in Moscow, four innocent college kids just partying up. I did that. I had fun. I lived in a house off campus. It was great. They're just living their best life, and to have something like this happen, but the fear that it creates, because not only have you, it's the ramifications throughout colleges all across the United States and the world. It instills fear in people. They don't feel safe, right? And who's watching me, who's stalking me on social media. But then you have the families that have been impacted, and then the perpetrator's family, Koberger's sisters, like have lost their jobs. The family is in poverty because of this. These people are affected because then you have people trying to go after them and excoriate them for something that they have nothing to do with. And I sort of have caught in my life both sides of that, because my mother was the victim and my father was the perpetrator and I was the witness. So
and a lot of people will sit back and say justice is served when that gavel hits. No, you're in justice lasts for life, and you're still addressing it. It's like, okay, now I'm a ward of the state. Who am I going to live with? It's not over when that gavel hits.
No, the uncertainty that you grow up with as a child, just not knowing where you're going to live, whether the place that you're staying at and foster care is going to kick you out because of you don't know if that's your last meal that you're having, because they could just say, we don't like you, we want you out of here. And they threaten that too, So
Wow.
I grew up a lot of that, but it's not just me. It's the system as a whole. It's not just something, it's not about me. It's about these conversations. I feel are just so important to just raise awareness, and just the more that people recognize this, and it's also just not to live in a state of fear. It's to live in a state of just understanding that the world is still a beautiful place, and there's beautiful things that can come out of all of this.
And you're so right. And it's such a blessing to hear that from someone that had such a tragic start, that you can still see that the imperfect world is a beautiful place, is enlightening, because most of us haven't gone through the hell that you were placed in. And they see our planet as dark and dismal and scary. And it's like, no, no, no. One of my past lives, I was in the U.S. Navy. When I graduated high school, I went and saw the world, and I've seen third world nations, and I've seen scary neighborhoods, and I've seen, and I come here and it's like I'd eat off the floor. I've seen some really scary floors, and this is not filth. This is not hoarding. This is not, you learn to appreciate life when you see how bad it can actually get.
Yes. And the freedoms that we have in this
Right.
country, that a lot of people, and I'm not getting political at all, but a lot of people who don't travel, I think there's a Mark Twain quote that has to do with the education of the world and traveling. I'm gonna have to pull it out somewhere. I know I've read it before, and I'm embarrassed I can't pull it off the top of my head, but just how seeing the world like you did in the U.S. Navy. I've traveled around the world to a lot of places, and you just see how things work in other places that we just take for granted here.
Right.
Even you go south of the border, where
Oh, yeah.
where
One of the examples I have from the Navy days, me and a couple of sailor friends went south of the border to Tijuana, and like a dummy, my one friend decides he's going to pee in the corner, and he got caught by the cops. It's like that was the most scary experience of my life at that time in my life. And the cop came up and said, "How much money you got?"
how much money you got?
He robbed us to set us free.
Yeah.
And you would never have that experience here in the U.S. You get a citation, they'll cuff you, they'll embarrass you, they'll do a lot of things, but you don't feel like you're going to get rolled by the cops to get your freedom. It's like, well, what were you doing? I mean, we didn't even have money for the train back to the ship. We had to like walk in the middle of the night back to the ship, and that took hours. And it's like, because we got rolled. The cops wanted my money and his money and his money, and we all gave up our money just so that my one friend wasn't going to be arrested.
Yeah.
And they look for those moments. They're looking for it, and it was just he peed behind a tree. It's like, good Lord.
Yeah, it's terrifying, and that's I live in Southern California. That's 3 hours away.
Right.
I was talking to an attorney yesterday who literally said they just started having, because he's advising the Mexican government about trials. They just started having trials in Mexico recently. They've never had a proper court system like we have. I'm like, what? Like,
that's bizarre, right? It's like, what? No wonder many of these perpetrators, their goal is, let's just get to the border.
And he was sharing with someone who was convicted of something in Nicaragua, which was a drug charge, which was a false drug charge, because he did not have the money to pay off the police. So they said, we found drugs on him, and that's like a 25-year mandatory sentence. You just throw it away, put you in prison, throw away the key. It's astonishing. It's very terrifying.
That's our Mexican neighbor. That's
our neighbors.
Little teeny, Eastern European country with communist roots. No, we're talking just below us. That's supposed to be part of our, trade agreement.
NAFTA.
Like, wow.
NAFTA. Yeah, we have trucks going back and forth on the I-5. Like, come on. We are very fortunate in this country, for sure.
And I wish everybody agreed with us on that, because I agree with you that we are blessed to be here. When it comes to the genetic lottery, we won because we were born in this country. We could have been in any other country, as starting our life, and it would have been a completely different experience. So for people longing to come here, I get it. For people saying, there should be a process or whatever, I get it, because we passed 8 billion Earthlings.
Yeah.
Can all 8 billion survive in the U.S.?
No.
Can we all just converge on this country and not strain our resources? We'd like to see an elevation of other standards, developing countries and third world countries. Can we get them up to a U.S. kind of live standard where there's no reason to travel here? Or is it going to take all of our money to fund them in hopes that they elevate their lifestyles? Those are big questions that I can't answer. I'll never see those answers in a favorable way in my lifetime. I'm sure we're a long ways from being the Federation, like in Star Trek, where there's just world peace, and San Francisco's the Federation center of the world, and we're traveling the galaxy. That's not going to happen. But I understand people would like to come here and live and chase the American dream, but many people are living the American dream and they just don't appreciate it.
Yeah. And I don't know anything about Star Trek, but I can do the Vulcan sign. I don't know why.
Many of us can live long and prosper.
There you go. Right. Jason, thank you so much for joining the program. So what is it that you're doing now? Tell our audience where they can find you, all of that.
I'm doing a lot, but I still don't feel satisfied. I still keep offering myself to other things. I feel like I can always help. I guess there's no limit to my madness, but working on the Ramsey case, working on the Rachael Runyan case, the Rosia Tapia case, and dozens and dozens of others. I got a search dog to help look for missing. I
saw that.
Missing people. That was the thing that we were featured on ABC 2020, was me and my search dog Lily, because we were called out through We Help the Missing, a nonprofit organization that I'm also a volunteer on, to go look for Gabby's remains up in Wyoming. When that day that we were heading out, they found her remains, so there was no reason to go up there. But 2020 caught wind of that and wanted me to demonstrate there at the Spread Creek Road location where her body was found to give a demonstration in how a search dog would look for remains like that. And it was, it was an honor to be on their show, and it's an honor to be on your show.
Thank you.
I'm like you, where getting the word out is more important than anything I can do by myself, because it's going to take a community to solve these cases and the cases that I haven't looked at, because many times it takes one piece of information that you don't realize is significant, but that one little piece of information may be enough to make a difference on the case, because something you heard or something that you know that you thought was innocent, that may, when it fits into the picture, exposes who the perpetrator is. So anytime someone has any information, I'm always one to encourage, share that with a professional working on the case or with law enforcement. And if you don't hear anything back, don't give up. Try another avenue. Try it again until you get acknowledgement, because many times information, if you call it a tip or a lead, may be jotted down and gets lost. So it's not that someone doesn't care or that it was not helpful. It may not have made it to the final source where it's going to have some impact. So keep trying. Don't give up. And as far as reaching me, you can find me on Twitter at JasonJPI, or you can, I'm on Facebook with my given name, Jason K. Jensen, or my website, Jensen Investigations. JensenPrivateInvestigations.com. But if there's something I can help, or if I can answer a question, feel free to reach out to me. I'm here. I believe in mentorship. I believe in education. You never stop learning, and if I have something to contribute in teaching, I'm here for whoever thinks they need it.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I'm sure I will leave links to Jason's Twitter, his Facebook, his all of his social medias and his websites in the show notes of today's episode. Jason Jensen, thank you so much for joining the program. I really appreciate it. I want to have you back on too at some point. So thank you.
Anytime, Collier. Appreciate you. It was a good interview, and I appreciate smart questions.
Oh, thank you so much. I will say one more thing before I let you go. What one of my viewers had said to me, which it always just sticks with me, is it's not the people that we see who are really impacted. It's the people that we don't see and hear from that are impacted the most by what we're doing.
Yeah. There's so many victims that are feel downtrodden and beaten, don't speak up because they feel like they've lost hope. We're here to give them hope, right?
Yes, we are.
Because as long as they have hope, tomorrow is a brighter, there's a chance that tomorrow being a brighter day.
Absolutely. Well said, sir. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. We'll see you.
Thanks, Collier. Have a good night.
Bye. That was a fantastic conversation. Thank you to all my channel supporters, all my Patreon supporters, all of you that bought Super Chat stickers and that have tuned into the program today here live on YouTube. On that note, I'm Collier Laundrie, and this is Moving Past Trauma. Thanks, y'all. This podcast is made possible by support from listeners just like you. For exclusive content around this podcast, please consider supporting me via Patreon by going to collierlandry.com/support. Please subscribe via Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from, and please leave us a 5-star review. If you want to see video episodes of this podcast, please check out my YouTube channel at youtube.com/collierlandry. You can find links to additional resources in the show notes of today's episode. This podcast is a production of Don't Touch My Radio. Copyright Collier Laundrie.